The fading light filtered through the dense canopy overhead, casting shadows that seemed to creep and crawl along the forest floor. Jackson Hartwell crouched low behind a moss-covered log, his keen eyes scanning the underbrush, rifle tight against his shoulder. At 32, Jackson was in peak physical condition, his muscular frame honed by years of training. His cropped brown hair and stern jawline marked him as a soldier, a defender of order and discipline. As his gaze swept the area, Jackson thought of the necessity of the hunt and the importance of the pills they all took to maintain control and rationality. It was a comforting thought. The crack of a branch sounded to his left. Jackson swiveled smoothly, aiming into the deepening shadows. One of the other soldiers emerged, leaves crunching under his boots. "See anything?" the man asked in a hushed tone. Jackson shook his head. "They're out there, though. Can almost smell them," the other soldier spat on the ground. "Filthy savages. It's what they deserve being out here. Should have taken their pills like decent folk." Jackson nodded. He'd seen the violent madness that came from going without the pills. Order must be maintained. It's for their own good. A shriek sounded in the distance, unearthly and chilling. Jackson felt his heart quicken. The hunt was on. He leapt up and plunged into the underbrush, ready to fulfill his duty. Jackson moved swiftly through the forest, senses alert. The government provided the pills to all citizens, touting them as the path to an orderly, peaceful society. Jackson believed deeply in their mission. The pills regulated emotion and behavior, keeping people calm, rational, and compliant. This allowed the government to maintain control. They distributed pamphlets and broadcasts emphasizing the benefits. No more violence, no more disorder, no more pain. Just a well-ordered, productive populace. Those who refused the pills or went off them were branded as savages, dangerous, and unpredictable. Many savages formed violent gangs, attacking government facilities and personnel. Jackson had seen the grisly aftermath firsthand. The government dealt with the savages harshly. Most were executed on sight. Some were exiled here, to the remote forests, left to live as animals. Over time, it was said the savages became deformed, regressing to a primal state without the pill's stabilizing effects. Jackson spotted movement up ahead. He signaled the other men, weapons ready. A ragged figure burst from the bushes, sprinting desperately. Jackson aimed and fired. The savage stumbled and fell, then lay still. Jackson moved stealthily through the dense forest, senses alert. This deep in savage territory, danger lurked behind every tree. He had to stay sharp. Ahead, he spotted a clearing bathed in sunlight. Jackson approached cautiously and swept the area. Seeing no movement, he stepped into the open space. That's when he noticed. His pill pack was gone. Jackson patted his pockets desperately, then checked the ground. Nothing. His heart hammered in his chest. Without the pills, he was cut off, vulnerable. How long since his last dose? 2 days already in the wilderness. Fear washed over him as the realization sunk in. He was becoming one of them now, a savage. Jackson's mind raced, panicked. He couldn't let the others find out. He'd be executed on the spot. But how to escape the forest without pills? As he spiraled, a sound snapped him to attention. Footsteps approaching. Jackson raised his rifle with shaking hands. A figure entered the clearing, then stopped short at the sight of Jackson. A woman, her clothes tattered and dirty. Her face was streaked with grime, but her eyes were clear and alert. She showed no signs of deformity or violence, just weariness and caution. Jackson's finger hovered over the trigger. His training told him she was a threat, a savage, but something in her gaze gave him pause. He saw himself reflected back, lost, afraid, struggling to survive. His aim wavered. The woman spoke. "You've lost your pills. I can tell." Her voice was rough but not unkind. Jackson stared wordlessly. "It's all right," she said gently. "The pills, they lie. Come, let us talk." Jackson lowered his rifle. A feeling long buried stirred in his chest. Not fear, but connection. He stepped forward. The woman gestured for Jackson to sit. He lowered himself to the forest floor, rifle still gripped tightly in his hands. "My name is Eliza," she said. "I've lived in these woods since I was a girl. We aren't the monsters they say, twisted and violent without the pills. We're just people." Jackson looked at her uncertainly. A lifetime of propaganda warred with the reality before him. Eliza's eyes were knowing. The pills control you, make you see things that aren't there. We appear as beasts, but only in your mind. No, Jaxon argued weakly. The pills keep order, protect us from savagery. The words felt hollow on his tongue. It's the pills that savage people, Eliza said gently. Strip away their humanity, their free will. You'll see, in time. Jackson's head swam. He thought of the hunts, the casual killing, all while drugged into blind obedience. Eliza squeezed his shoulder. Be brave. The truth is here, if you dare see it. Jaxon looked at Eliza, really saw her, and felt something shift inside. His old life crumbled away. He would stay in the woods, he realized. Seek answers, however painful. The pills had warped him, but no longer. Tell me everything, he said. Jaxon decided to leave the forest. He looked at the compass and moved forward. Jaxon froze as the blade of a hunting knife pressed against his throat. Blinking in the dappled sunlight, he focused on the wild-haired woman before him. She was crouched low, body coiled and ready to strike. Who are you? She demanded, green eyes flashing. Jaxon raised his hands slowly. My name's Jaxon. I'm lost. No threat to you. The woman studied him intently before lowering her knife. Lila, she said shortly, rising from her crouch. You're a long way from the cities. Jaxon let out a shaky breath, massaging his throat. The pills were supposed to make society safer, yet this feral woman had threatened his life. Lila rifled through a makeshift pack, producing a tin cup and a water skin. As Jaxon drank gratefully, she gave him an appraising look. I reckon you've been in the forest long enough to feel it. The sickness. Jaxon frowned. Sickness? Aye. The pills. They poison us. Those who don't take 'em get sick in the cities. So we live out here to survive. Jaxon reeled as her words sank in. The pills were supposed to protect people, not harm them. But the longer he was without them, the clearer his mind became. A determination grew within him. He had to share this truth, no matter the cost. Jaxon studied Lila as she stoked the small fire, her movements quick and efficient. Though her appearance was wild, her steady gaze and decisive manner revealed a sharp intellect. How long have you lived out here? He asked. She paused, eyes flickering toward him. All my life. My parents fled to the forest before I was born. Jaxon frowned. He had been taught that life outside the city was cruel and backward. Yet Lila possessed skills and knowledge he lacked. What's it like, living free of the pills? Lila's expression turned thoughtful. Hard. But our minds are clear. We feel things deeper. She brushed a hand across the forest floor. We learn the Earth's secrets. Jaxon nodded slowly. Her connection to nature was unlike anything he'd encountered in the sterile, regulated cities. Not all accept us, she continued. We're seen as savages, but we only want to live as we are. Her tone held no bitterness, only resolve. Jaxon felt his perception shifting. The world was far more complex than he'd known. Lila represented a resilience and humanity beyond the empty docility of the cities. She and her people deserved understanding, not judgment. His mission now was clear. He would share the truth about the pills, building bridges between two worlds artificially divided. With compassion and cooperation, a new unity could emerge. There's so much I don't know, Jaxon said. I've only seen one side. The lies they peddle about life off the pills. Lila nodded. The worst is how they force the pills on school children. Entire generations never knowing their true selves. Her voice hardened. Jaxon shook his head in dismay. He had swallowed the propaganda for too long. It ends now, he said firmly. I'll expose what the pills have done. The blunting of emotions, the loss of free will. No one will take them willingly once they know the truth. Lila smiled, but uncertainty flickered in her eyes. Your leaders will fight back. They'll do anything to keep control. You're right. It won't be easy. Jackson's jaw tightened with resolve. But together we can strategize, gather testimonies, find others willing to resist. He met her gaze. With your knowledge of the villages and my access to the cities, we can wake people on both sides. We can forge understanding between your people and mine. Lila considered this, then nodded. United. We are strong. She extended her hand and Jaxon clasped it. A wordless pact against a world that had pitted them against each other. But no longer. Jackson's mind raced with the implications of what they were undertaking. He knew the risks would be immense, not just to him, but to Lila and her people. They had suffered enough hardship already. He hesitated. Are you sure you want to do this? It won't just put me in danger, but you and your whole village if the government discovers your involvement. Lila looked at him steadily. We stopped fearing the government long ago. Their persecution only strengthened our resolve. She set her jaw. It's time we push back against the injustice. Jaxon nodded slowly. Her courage was humbling. You're right. We can't let fear stop us from doing what's right. He paused, thinking. But we'll need evidence. Proof of what the pills have done. Straight from those affected. Lila nodded. Testimonies. From both the elders here, and outsiders like you who now see the truth. Exactly. Jaxon felt galvanized by the idea taking shape. With your help, I can start collecting accounts and recording them, on video, with witnesses, evidence not easily dismissed. Lila's eyes lit up. Yes, and my people can help spread the word, to more villages, more outsiders. Her voice grew urgent with possibility. We can build an alliance, the first of its kind. Jaxon clasped her shoulder, moved by her willingness to aid this cause despite all she had endured. Then let's begin. Jaxon and Lila stood together at the edge of the forest, taking in the sprawling cityscape that lay before them. After days of planning, gathering testimonies, and rallying support amongst the non-pill takers, they were finally ready to return to civilization. Jaxon felt a swell of determination as he gazed at the distant skyscrapers. For so long, he had been blind to the injustice propagated by the pills. But now, armed with evidence and allies, he was prepared to open people's eyes to the truth. Beside him, Lila shifted, her wild curls stirring in the breeze. Hard to believe we were enemies not long ago, she murmured. Jaxon nodded. Now we're united by a common cause. We'll be stronger together. He turned to Lila. I know the road ahead will be difficult, but I promise to stand by you as you've stood by me. He held out his hand. Lila clasped his forearm in the traditional gesture of her people. And I promise to stand by you, no matter what happens. Their pact sealed, they turned back towards the city. The light of the setting sun glinted off the distant towers, filling Jaxon with hope. There would be resistance, danger, and setbacks. But with Lila as his staunch ally, Jaxon knew they could accomplish what had seemed impossible just days before. The truth would be revealed, and the world would never be the same. You, Lila, have to stay here. You will be recognized immediately, but I will come back for you. I hope so, she replied. You need to find Dr. Hayward. He used to work with us. Maybe he can help. The faint glow of a single bulb revealed a cramped exam room. Jaxon blinked, getting used to the darkness after traversing the damp tunnels for hours. A woman with silver hair tied in a loose bun stood next to the examination table. Her posture was rigid, and her gaze wandered between Jaxon and the door. Dr. Hayward? Jackson's voice echoed off the concrete walls. The woman nodded. What do you need? Her tone was clipped, guarded. Jackson's muscles tightened. He needed her help, but could he trust her? I'm told you treat people who are affected by pills. Dr. Hayward's expression softened slightly. Yes, that's right. She pointed to a chair. Sit down and we'll discuss your symptoms. Jaxon sat down, his pulse pounding. He had to choose his words carefully. It's not me. It's a friend. The pills are giving him terrible headaches. He can't keep taking them, he said. Dr. Hayward raised an eyebrow. Headaches are common. Why is your friend so concerned? Jaxon leaned forward, lowering his voice. Because the pills are poisoning people. He knows the truth, he said. A flash of understanding appeared on the doctor's face. She walked over to a cabinet and took out a vial. This will replace the pills. The friend will not be recognized that he is not taking, but it is enough for a week. She handed Jaxon the vial. Be very careful who you tell about it. Jaxon put the vial in his pocket, feeling relief flooding through him. Thank you, doctor. Dr. Hayward nodded, her expression serious. Good luck. Jaxon hesitated before speaking again. There is something else I need to discuss. This friend wants to reveal what the pills really do. But talking about it is dangerous, he said. Dr. Hayward tensed, her eyes narrowed. Be careful. Such talk leads to disappearances. I know the risks, Jaxon said. But people need to know the truth. Can you advise on how to spread this information safely? The doctor pondered him for a long moment. Finally, she walked over to her desk and scribbled something on a piece of paper. Start with those you trust, she said quietly. Build a network of influential allies, doctors, scientists, and even military officers who value ethics over orders. She handed Jaxon a paper. This is a list of potential contacts. Proceed with extreme caution, she said. Her expression was serious. Jaxon scanned the list, and his pulse quickened. This could work. Thank you, Doctor. Your help is invaluable, he said. Dr. Hayward smiled thinly. Our survival depends on brave souls like you. She grabbed his arm. Now go. And remember, trust no one fully. Jaxon folded the paper and tucked it away. He met the doctor's stern gaze and nodded. The first seed had been planted. Now he had to nurture them, and hope they would take root. Jaxon slipped out of the hidden clinic, and Dr. Hayward's list burned a hole in his pocket. He blinked in the harsh sunlight, quickly getting his bearings. The military base was less than a mile away, his first stop. As he approached, Jaxon kept to the shadows, with years of training guiding his quiet steps. He easily bypassed the guards, heading for the barracks. His pulse pounded as he wondered who to contact first. Sergeant Ayo came to mind. They had served together for years. Ayo was smart, discreet, and most importantly, he asked questions instead of blindly following orders. Jaxon noticed Ayo making his rounds near the armory. When the sergeant was left alone, Jaxon emerged from the shadows. Ayo turned around and put his hand on his holster, then his eyes widened. Hartwell? What the hell? Keep your voice down, Jaxon hissed. I shouldn't be here. Ayo scanned the area and came closer. You disappeared a few weeks ago. Rumor had it that you went into desertion. Not by your own choice, Jaxon replied grimly. The pills have many side effects. Jaxon explained everything to him and showed him the recordings. Ayo turned pale. Christ. I knew something was wrong with those pills. People following orders like damn robots. Jaxon grabbed his arm. This has to stop, Ayo. Can I count on your help in spreading the truth? The sergeant met his gaze. You know you can. He paused. Although we'll probably die because of it? Jaxon earned a dark chuckle. So we'd better get to work. Jaxon knew that Sergeant Ayo could be trusted to discreetly disseminate information about the pills to the soldiers. But to really stop the government's insidious plan, Jaxon had to cut off production at the source. After leaving the base, he headed through the city under cover of darkness. His target was the imposing white facility where the pills were produced. Jaxon looked at it from the outside, noting the high walls, security cameras, and armed guards. Getting inside would be nearly impossible without help. Jackson's thoughts turned to Dr. Hayward, an underground doctor fighting the effects of the pills. If anyone knew how to break into the facility, it was her. Jaxon located the hidden entrance to the underground tunnels. Shining a flashlight on himself, he traversed the damp, narrow corridors until he reached Dr. Hayward's clinic. It was late, and only one light was on inside. He knocked quietly, identifying himself to the eye-hole. The door opened, revealing Dr. Hayward, her intelligent eyes peering from behind her owlish glasses. Jaxon. I was expecting you, she said. She ushered him inside. After securing the door, Jaxon quickly explained his plan to infiltrate the production facility. Dr. Hayward nodded thoughtfully. Getting inside will be extremely difficult, but once you get in, there may be a way to make the pills useless. Dr. Hayward led Jaxon into a small room lined with books and vials. She looked through some notes on a desk, then turned to him. I analyzed the composition of the pills, she explained. It seems that the formula lacks a stabilizing factor. Without it, the pills will degrade quickly. She showed Jaxon a detailed chemical analysis. If we can smuggle this stabilizer into the manufacturing process, it will destabilize the pills, rendering them useless. Jackson's eyes lit up with hope. This could work. But we'll need help to do it, warned Dr. Hayward. I have an inside contact at the center. Someone who owes me for his daughter's treatment. He may be able to smuggle us out. Jaxon nodded. Let's contact him. In the meantime, I'll use my military contacts to get more support. Dr. Hayward agreed to set up a meeting with her informant. Jaxon left with plans swirling in his head. Everything was falling into place. With skill and a little luck, they could outsmart the government and free people from the insidious pills. The fight was on. Jaxon met with Dr. Hayward and her informant late one evening at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. He arrived early, carefully scouring the area before slipping inside. Dr. Hayward's contact, a man named Caleb, looked at Jaxon with reserve. The doctor says you need help getting into the center. It won't be easy, he said. Jackson's face was grim. I know the risks, but it has to be done, no matter what. Caleb nodded slowly. All right, I can get you through the service entrance during your shift, but you'll have limited time before the others realize. That's all I need, Jaxon said. Enough time to add the stabilizer to the production vat. Dr. Hayward handed him a vial. This concentrate will destabilize thousands of pills, but you have to be precise with the dosage. Jaxon carefully tucked the vial into his pocket. His military training had prepared him for high-stakes missions like this one. Caleb outlined the security protocols and schedules at the facility. Jaxon listened carefully, memorizing every detail. He was ready. As they slipped into the night to prepare for the infiltration, Jaxon felt the weight of what they were about to do. So much depended on their success. Failure would mean further enslavement of the population by the insidious pills. He prepared for the coming battle. The next few days would decide the fate of humanity. Jaxon stood at attention, with his back straight and his eyes focused ahead, while Captain Rhodes stepped in front of him. Your behavior has been very erratic lately, soldier, Rhodes said in a sharp voice. Late returns from patrols, extended periods of being out of protocol in the woods, whispers of insubordination. He stopped and approached Jaxon, his breath hot on his face. Explain yourself. Jackson's pulse quickened, but he maintained a neutral expression. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to be disrespectful. The forest can be disorienting, and sometimes I lose track of time. Rhodes squinted his eyes. The moment you lost your orientation is suspicious. The savages became bolder. Jaxon looked him straight in the eye. In response, we have increased the number of patrols. I share your concern for the safety of our citizens. Nice words, growled Rhodes. But something doesn't add up here. Jaxon took a slow breath. The truth was simmering beneath the surface, threatening to boil over. But he had to be patient. The stakes were too high. With all due respect, people need reassurance now more than ever, Jaxon said calmly. Questioning my loyalty only undermines morale. Rhodes looked at him for a long moment. Jaxon stood motionless with tensed muscles. Finally, Rhodes stepped back. You've always been a good soldier, Hartwell. Give me no reason to doubt that, he said. The expression on Rhodes' face hardened. But I have my eye on you. Be vigilant and do your duty so you don't make me do it. Jaxon nodded. Understood, sir. As Rhodes turned on his heel, Jaxon breathed quietly. It was close. Too close. He had gained some time, but his chance was shrinking. The truth had to come out, no matter the cost. Jaxon watched Rhodes's receding back, and his mind raced. He had to be more careful, but the clock was ticking. Looking around, Jaxon confirmed that no one else was in sight. It was time for action. He moved through the complex, taking deliberate steps. Within minutes, he reached the barracks and slipped inside, the door closing behind him with a hiss. Walking quickly to his bunk, Jaxon pulled out a small metal suitcase from under it and opened it. Inside were several data chips and a compact recording device, the evidence he had managed to collect so far. But it wasn't enough. He needed more. Jaxon put the recorder in his pocket and activated his government tablet. He pulled up maps of the surrounding sectors, studying them carefully. There had to be more answers there. If only he could find a way to gain access to restricted areas. A notification appeared at the top of the screen. His shift was about to begin. Jaxon turned off the tablet and hid it under the bed. He would come up with a plan in the evening, after doing his chores. For now, it was time to reassume the role of the obedient soldier. Jaxon straightened his uniform and headed for the door, preparing for the day ahead. The first seed of rebellion had been sown. Now it was only a matter of time before resistance would begin to grow. Jaxon found Sylvia Grant in the training yard, conducting drills with the newest recruits. He watched her from the edge of the square, noting her confidence and poise as she led the adepts through combat maneuvers. Sylvia had always been a talented soldier, one of the reasons he trusted her more than anything. As she dismissed the recruits for a break, Jaxon approached her. "Sylvia, do you have a moment?" She turned, brushing a loose strand of blonde hair out of her eyes. "Jaxon, what's going on?" He looked around. This was no place for a private conversation. "Can we talk somewhere else? This is important." Sylvia looked at him for a moment, then nodded. "Meet me behind the parking lot in 10 minutes. Jaxon agreed and they parted ways. He walked impatiently past the squat garage, his nerves beginning to take over. It was a big risk, but if he could convince Sylvia. She finally appeared, and her expression was wary. "This had better be good, Jaxon. I should lead the exercise." Jaxon took a breath. "Have you ever thought about the pills, Sylvia? What's really in them?" Her eyes narrowed. "Don't tell me you're one of those conspiracy theorists." "Listen to me," he pleaded. "I've seen all sorts of things out there in the woods. Things they don't want us to know about." Sylvia crossed her arms, skeptical. But she didn't walk away either. Jaxon took the recorder out of his pocket. "I have proof," he said quietly. "Recordings, data chips. But I can't figure it out myself." He looked into her eyes. "I need your help, Sylvia. I can't do this without you," he said. She looked at him for a long moment, then slowly reached for the recorder. As she reviewed its contents, Jaxon saw the first traces of doubt in her eyes. His heart was pounding. This was it, the point of no return. All he could do now was hope that her conscience would prevail. Sylvia's hands shook as she scrolled through the footage, images and data flashing by in a flash. Her eyebrows crinkled more and more with each passing second. Finally, she raised her eyes, expressing concern. "My God, Jaxon, if any of this is true," she interrupted, looking around as if seeing their surroundings for the first time. Jaxon could almost hear the gears turning in her head. "I don't know what to believe anymore," she admitted. "But I trust you. If you say something is wrong, I'm with you," she said. Jaxon let out a breath he hadn't realized. "Thank you," he said fervently. Sylvia grabbed his arm. "We can't let them get away with this. Whatever you need, I'm here," she said. Her eyes blazed with determination. At that moment, Jaxon saw the ally he needed, unwavering, dedicated, and courageous. Together they could reveal the truth. He squeezed her hand tightly. "It won't be easy, but we have to try." Sylvia nodded. "Let's do it." They quickly embraced, cementing their pact. When they pulled away, Jaxon felt ready. With Sylvia at his side, he could face anything that came his way. Jaxon contemplated his next moves. The alliance with Sylvia was crucial, but also dangerous. One mistake could ruin everything. "I will be gone for a few days. I would like you to cover for me mainly from Captain Rhodes. He is beginning to suspect. I need a legal pass. Are you able to get it for me?" "Sure," Sylvia replied. "I can give you mine, which I haven't used yet. I have a pass for 3 days. He paused, looking into her eyes. "It's not too late to leave. Once we do, there will be no turning back." Sylvia straightened it up with determination etched on her face. "I said I'm with you. Don't try to protect me now," she said. She started to turn away, but stopped. "Jaxon, thank you for trusting me. What we do is bigger than us. It matters," she said. Jaxon looked at her solemnly. "Now we're in this together. I know who can help us. Ilara, my friend from school, works on pills," said Sylvia. With a final nod, they parted, preparing for the coming battle. The risk was great, but the truth was worth it. Together, they would see things through to the end. The stench of gasoline and mold assaulted Jaxon's nostrils as he crept down a dimly lit underground corridor. His footsteps echoed faintly as he scanned the bare concrete walls for any sign of life. Somewhere in this secret facility, the answers he sought waited behind closed doors. Jaxon squeezed his gun tighter as he heard approaching voices around the corner. He squeezed into the shadows, holding his breath as two armed guards walked past, engrossed in mundane conversation. Jaxon waited until their voices quieted, then continued down the corridor. "Where are you, Alara Pierce?" thought Jaxon, looking through the dirty window of every closed metal door he passed. His search for the Institute's scientist led him to this heavily fortified facility hidden deep beneath the city. Entrance was not easy, but he was determined to discover the truth, no matter the risks. As Jaxon reached the end of the corridor, he noticed light oozing from an open door. Stepping inside, his eyes narrowed at the sight of a woman sitting at a desk, her face illuminated by the glow of a computer screen. "Alara Pierce," Jaxon said, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "We need to talk." Alara turned away, looking at Jaxon coolly. "You're a long way from home, soldier." Jaxon unlocked his pistol and stepped forward. After everything he had witnessed, he needed answers that only Alara could give. The pills, the Institute, the secrets hidden from the public. Alara was the key. She represented hope, a chance to save humanity from enforced ignorance. With fate intertwined with a brilliant and mysterious scientist, Jaxon prepared for the hard truths that were to come. Alara stood calmly, undeterred by Jaxon's sudden appearance in her underground office. She seemed to exude authority and confidence, which infuriated Jaxon. "I was expecting you," she said smoothly. "Ever since your little episode in the woods, I knew it was only a matter of time before you came looking for me." Jackson's eyes narrowed suspiciously. How could she know about what had happened to him there? His superiors had assured him that it would remain secret. "Surprised?" asked Alara with a hint of amusement in her voice. "I need to know things, Jaxon, especially when they involve my work," he said. "Your work?" asked Jaxon. "You mean the pills? Did you help develop them?" Alara crossed her arms. "I'm not responsible for how the government decided to use my research." Jaxon watched her closely, trying to determine whether she could be trusted. He needed allies, but something about this scientist made him feel uneasy. Still, she clearly had the knowledge he needed. "I need to understand how the pills work," Jaxon said cautiously. "How to counteract them?" Alara tilted her head. "Why? So that you can free people? To become some kind of savior?" When Jaxon did not answer, she sighed and gestured to a chair. "Sit down, soldier. We have a lot to discuss," she said. Jaxon carefully sat down opposite her. He listened to what Alara had to say, but decided to remain alert. For now, she seemed to hold all the cards, but he would soon discover the truth about her motives. For now, he needed her knowledge, despite his lingering doubts. Alara leaned back in her chair, watching Jaxon with her penetrating blue eyes. "Let's not play games. You want to know how to neutralize the effect of the pills to stop controlling the population. And you think I have that knowledge," he said. Jaxon clenched his jaw. "If you helped develop them, you must know the way." "I must?" Alara raised an eyebrow. "The pills combine each mind into a unified consciousness. What you call control is simply order. Security. Security by giving up free will," Jaxon replied. "Forcing people to conform to one vision of life." Alara shrugged her shoulders. "Some would say that freedom is overrated. But I suppose you discovered that during your little episode in the forest," she said. Jaxon stiffened. How could she know that? "Surprised?" asked Alara. "I try to know things, especially about my work." Jaxon's head spun. Alara clearly knew more than she was revealing. He'll have to tread carefully until he understands her motives. But if she could help stop the pills, he had to try. "I experienced their clarity," Jaxon said slowly. "Now I know that controlling people's thoughts is wrong. I have a neutralizer that, when added to production, can change everything." Alara crossed her arms. "It's not that simple. For the neutralizer to work, it requires an extremely rare compound. Even I've only seen small samples," she said. She turned around and tapped on the keyboard. A chemical formula appeared on the monitor. "This," she said, "is the missing ingredient. It has unique properties that can reverse the effects of the pills. But it can only be found in one place, deep in the wilderness." Jackson's stomach tightened. The wilderness was dangerous, unexplored territory, ravaged by wars before the government was formed. No one took any risks there. "In that case, I'll go there," he said. Ilara raised an eyebrow. "Would you defy the government and risk your life on my word?" Jaxon looked her straight in the eye. "I have seen the truth with my own eyes. If there is any chance of stopping the pills, I must take it," he said. He thought of the people in the city, minds shackled by invisible chains. Ilara might be his only hope to free them. "Tell me where I can find the compound," he urged. "I'll take care of the rest." Ilara thought for a moment, then nodded. She tapped the keyboard again and a map appeared, zooming in on a section of the wilderness. "Here," she said. "If our information is correct, there may be a supply source in this area, but it will be heavily guarded." Jaxon memorized the location. He had his mission. Failure was not an option. "I will return with the compound," he promised. "No matter what." Jaxon returned to his modest apartment to get ready. He methodically gathered his equipment: water canteens, packs of dry rations, a medical kit, his trusty rifle. The wilderness was hundreds of miles away across rugged, barren terrain. Reaching the compound would test his survival skills to the limit, but his military training had prepared him for it. As he checked his supplies, his mind raced forward, visualizing the dangers that awaited him. He had to dodge the puddles of acid that were scattered across the landscape, being careful not to let the fumes overwhelm him. The wind-swept plains offered no protection from the elements or from the creatures that still prowled there. And if Ilara was right, the complex was guarded by security forces. Jaxon finished assembling his equipment, then cleaned and oiled his rifle. He focused on each task, concentrating his nerves on preparations. Failure here could mean the end, for him and for any hope of stopping the pills. He glanced at the government clock on the wall. Dusk was approaching. Under cover of darkness, he made his way beyond the city limits into the wilderness. He kept his head down until he was out of sight. Jaxon took a deep breath, gathering his strength. He had one chance to get it right, to save his people and perhaps redeem himself. The clock struck the hour. It was time to move. Jaxon shouldered his backpack and set off into the night, ready to face whatever awaited in this harsh and hostile land. His mission had begun. Jaxon moved quickly and silently through the deserted streets, keeping to the shadows to avoid detection. He had at most 30 minutes before surveillance drones would fly through the sector. When he reached the outer perimeter, he spotted the first obstacle: an electrified fence topped with barbed wire. Jaxon searched for weak points in the fence until he finally found a damaged section hidden behind an abandoned building. Keeping low, he used wire cutters to cut a hole large enough to crawl through. As soon as he slipped through the fence, Jaxon threw himself into flight, running across the open area toward the shelter of a crumbling highway overpass. He had maybe 10 minutes before the drones arrived. Halfway to the overpass, Jaxon heard the whir of the propellers of an approaching drone. He ducked behind a rusty car and looked out as the drone's searchlight swept the area. Holding his breath, he forced himself to remain motionless until the drone flew by. As the drone moved on, Jaxon covered the final stretch to the overpass. He ran up the embankment and rolled under the collapsed section, safely out of sight. He managed to get past the first layer of security, he thought, catching his breath. But here the real dangers were just beginning. As Jaxon rested under the cover of the overpass, he reviewed the information Ilara had given him. The ingredient he was looking for was located deep underground in a secret bunker, accessible only through sewer tunnels beneath the ruins. He located the nearest access point to the tunnel. Grabbing a flashlight, Jaxon lifted the manhole cover and descended a rusty ladder into the darkness below. The damp air reeked of decay and chemicals. In the light of the flashlight, he saw that the walls were glistening with slime, and foul water dripped from pipes overhead. Jaxon turned on the Geiger counter that Ilara had provided. As he ventured deeper, the clicking intensified. He was heading in the right direction, but the radiation level was dangerously high. He put a gas mask over his face and moved on. The maze of tunnels seemed endless. Checking the map, Jaxon identified a tunnel leading to the bunker entrance. He stuck the crowbar into the rusted door and pushed it open with all his might until it creaked. Jaxon found himself in a huge chamber, filled from floor to ceiling with shelves. Each shelf held row after row of unmarked tin cans. The ingredient he was looking for was somewhere in here, but there were thousands of identical cans. As Jaxon pondered where to begin his search, he heard a squawking sound from the shadows. He swept the area with his flashlight and encountered dozens of glowing eyes. From them emerged mutated creatures, growling and snapping. The bunker's radiation had turned them into ferocious monsters, intent on protecting their lair. Jaxon reacted instinctively, grabbing his rifle and firing shots to stop the creatures. After a while they hid in the shadows, but he knew they would return. He had to act quickly. He searched the shelves for any markers on the ancient cans. Finally, his light reflected on a small symbol engraved on one of them, matching the drawing Alara had shown him. He grabbed the can and put it in his backpack just as the creatures reappeared, teeth bared and ready to attack. Jaxon fired chaotically to clear a path as the growling horde approached him. He felt the razor-sharp teeth slash his arm as he raced back through the maze of tunnels. The creatures pursued him relentlessly, maddened by the intruder in their lair. Jaxon's lungs burned from the exertion and radiation. Just when he felt he was ready to collapse, he saw a sliver of daylight in front of him. An exit. With his last strength, he climbed the ladder and slammed the hatch cover behind him, leaving the creatures scratching and howling below. Clutching his prize, Jaxon limped to the entrance of the bunker, blood dripping from his wounds. He succeeded in his mission, but incurred great personal costs in the process. When he saw the city, he prepared for another confrontation, with Alara. The darkness of the forest pressed in on all sides, broken only by the pale glow of the portable TV in Leela's shaking hands. Its static-laced audio barely rose above the rustling leaves and distant thrum of helicopter blades sweeping the area. "We can't stay here," hissed Ty, his lanky frame coiled tight as a spring where he crouched at the shelter entrance. "It's only a matter of time before they find us." Lila's eyes stayed fixed on the screen, where a polished news anchor extolled the virtues of the mandatory pills, claiming they were the only thing standing between civilization and savagery. "Lies," Lila muttered. "All lies." Her friends glanced at each other, uncertainty etched on their faces. They had grown up ingesting this propaganda daily. Questioning it felt dangerous, even terrifying. A crackle in the underbrush made them all freeze. Ty peered out into the impenetrable dark. A sweeping spotlight briefly illuminated the trees before passing on. "We need to move now," Ty said, urgency raising his voice. Lila clicked off the TV and stuffed it in her pack with trembling hands. They melted into the shadows, hearts pounding with each rustle of leaves that could betray their presence to the encroaching soldiers. The group moved as swiftly and silently as ghosts through the dense tangle of forest, following paths long memorized. But the darkness pressed in oppressively, broken sporadically by sweeping spotlights that sent their hearts into their throats. Lila tried to control her ragged breathing as she ran. The pills were supposed to make people docile, obedient. But she had seen their sinister effects firsthand in the blank stares and violent outbursts of her childhood friends after their mandated doses. She would never let that happen to her own mind and body. A resounding crack split the air, followed by shouts. Lila's blood turned to ice. Had they been spotted? "Go! Go!" Ty yelled, spurring them all forward. More cracks rang out, bullets embedding themselves in trunks perilously close to their fleeing forms. Leela's lungs burned and her legs ached as she pushed herself faster through the grasping foliage. Still, the sounds of pursuit followed close behind. A root snagged Leela's foot, and she crashed to the forest floor. Rough hands grabbed her instantly, hauling her to her feet. She thrashed violently, but froze at the cold press of a rifle barrel under her chin. Her friends stood rigidly at gunpoint, ringed by expressionless soldiers. "Well, well," said a smooth voice. "What do we have here?" Lila glared at the soldier who had spoken. His mouth curved into a smile both sinister and satisfied. Savages. Lila's mind raced, assessing the situation. 6 armed soldiers had them surrounded, with no clear route of escape. She needed to buy time, wait for an opening. "We're just trying to survive out here," she said, keeping her voice steady. "The pills, they make you sick, like zombies." We had to get away. The soldier's smile didn't waver. Oh, I'm sure Command will be very interested to hear all about your misguided fears. Once we've straightened out that rebellious streak of yours. He grabbed Lila's arm, twisting it sharply behind her back. She bit back a gasp of pain. Now let's get you all back to civilization, shall we? He gave her a shove forward. Lila glanced desperately at her friends as they were prodded along by the soldiers. She had to do something. These soldiers were like robots, unfeeling as they followed their orders. Reasoning with them was pointless. As they neared a ravine, an idea sparked. Lila pretended to stumble, crashing into the soldier holding her. He lost his balance, teetering at the edge of the drop-off. Lila gave him a hard shove and he toppled over with a shout. "Run!" Lila yelled. Chaos erupted as her friends broke free and sprinted into the woods. Shots rang out, but they didn't stop. Lila ran until her lungs burned, determined to make it back to the hidden shelter. She would keep fighting, no matter what it took. Lila and her friends crashed through the forest, branches whipping their faces as they fled from the soldiers. Their legs burned and their chests heaved, but they didn't dare stop. Finally, just as Lila thought she couldn't take another step, they stumbled upon a small, ramshackle hut nestled between two huge oak trees. "In here," Lila gasped, pushing open the creaky door. Her friends hurried inside, collapsing onto the dusty floor as Lila slammed the door shut. For a moment, the only sound was their labored breathing. Lila's heart hammered in her chest. Had they lost the soldiers? She pressed her ear to the door, but heard nothing except the usual forest noises. "Do you think we're safe?" her friend Lucas whispered between gulps of air. "For now," Lila replied. She tried to slow her breathing, but her body still trembled with adrenaline and fear. They'd escaped the soldiers, but they all knew it was only temporary. As long as those pills existed, turning people into mindless followers, nowhere was truly safe. Lila sank down against the wall, finally allowing herself a moment of rest. But it was short-lived. The door burst open, and Lila found herself staring down the barrel of a gun. The soldier from the ravine stood in the doorway, his face a mask of cold rage. "You'll regret that, savage," he growled. A shot rang out. Lila's vision went black. Jaxon crept into the dimly lit laboratory, the rhythmic pounding of his heart competing with the echo of his footsteps on the cold tile floor. Before him stood Alara, her posterior erect, chin held high, surrounded by shelves lined with mysterious vials and blinking equipment. An almost imperceptible smile played at the corner of her lips. "Hello, Jaxon," she purred, her voice smooth yet commanding. "I've been expecting you." Jaxon swallowed, trying to steady his nerves. Alara's piercing blue eyes seemed to stare right through him. He felt exposed under her gaze, as if she could read his every doubt and fear. "Get it together, Jaxon. This is your only chance." He steadied his breathing and met her stare. "I have what you asked for." He patted the pouch on his belt. "Now it's your turn to hold up your end. You said you would help take down the Institute." Alara clasped her hands behind her back and began to slowly circle him. Jaxon fought the urge to turn and follow her movements. "Eager to bite the hand that feeds you?" she mused. "My dear boy, you still have so much to learn." Jaxon clenched his fists. He had to stay focused. "Enough games, Alara. Are you going to help me or not?" She stopped abruptly and locked eyes with him again, her expression shifting. Jaxon searched her face but found no trace of the warm mentor he once knew. This was the real Alara. Cold, calculating, dangerous. "Oh, I'll help you, Jaxon," she purred. "I'll help speed you to your end." Alara let out a low, chilling laugh as she saw the confusion dawn on Jaxon's face. "Did you really think I would betray the Institute?" she asked. "After all they've given me? All the knowledge and power?" She began to slowly walk around him again, like a predator circling weakened prey. "I was the one who created the pills, Jaxon. I modified them to cause disgust in those who don't take them. An ingenious bit of programming, if I do say so myself." Jackson's mind reeled. He had trusted her, believed her lies, and all this time, she was the enemy. "Why?" he managed to choke out. "I thought you wanted to help people, to cure them." "Oh, but I am helping them," Alara purred. I'm helping them see the truth. That compliance is the only path to peace. She stopped in front of him again, her eyes flashing. And as for you, your pathetic rebellion ends here. The Institute thanks you for leading us right to the resistance. Once we wipe them out, nothing will stand in our way. Jaxon felt the blood drain from his face. What had he done? Jackson's hands curled into fists as rage boiled up inside him. You monster, he spat. All those innocent lives lost because of your pills, your experiments, my friends. His voice broke as Lila's face flashed in his mind. Alara's lip curled in a cold smile. Yes, what a shame about your little savage friend, she said. She turned and opened a cabinet behind her. Jackson's stomach dropped as she pulled out a folder. I thought you might want to see what became of her, Alara purred, holding out the folder. Jaxon stared at it, bile rising in his throat. He didn't want to look, but his shaking hands reached out and took it. The first image made him gasp and stumble back. Lila's body, broken and bloodied almost beyond recognition. Her once bright eyes now lifeless and dim. Jackson's heart shattered. This was all his fault. Alara had used him, and now Lila had paid the price. You'll never get away with this, he whispered hoarsely, tears stinging his eyes. Alara laughed. But my dear Jaxon, I already have. Her cold smile sent a chill down his spine. He had walked right into her trap, and now there was no way out. Jackson's mind reeled, struggling to comprehend the extent of Alara's deception. She had preyed upon his desire to do good, to make a difference, and used him as a pawn in her twisted game. He thought of Dr. Hayward, the ally who had first opened his eyes to the truth about the pills. She had trusted him, believed in him. Was she already dead at Alara's hand? Hayward, he croaked. What have you done with her? Alara waved a hand dismissively. Oh, don't worry about the good doctor. My soldiers were only interested in bringing her in for questioning about her underground activities. Such a shame she resisted arrest. The implication of her words hit Jaxon like a punch to the gut. Dr. Hayward, his mentor, was gone. Another life lost because of him. And Io, his friend in the forest settlement. Had Alara's forces wiped them out as well? The full extent of the destruction he had enabled threatened to overwhelm him. He sank to his knees, anguish and despair crashing over him in waves. This couldn't be happening. It couldn't end like this. But as Alara loomed over him, Jaxon knew she had won. The hope he had found, the cause he was willing to die for, she had destroyed it all. And he had no one to blame but himself. As Jaxon knelt on the cold floor, the weight of defeat pressing down on him, the sound of a door opening broke the silence. He lifted his head to see a petite, blonde figure entering the lab. Sylvia. Her presence was so unexpected, so impossible, that for a moment Jaxon wondered if she was a figment of his imagination. But no, it was really her. Sylvia, his loyal friend and fellow soldier. The one person left he thought he could still trust. Hope flickered within him. If anyone could help him turn this around, it was Sylvia. Sylvia! He cried out hoarsely. You found me! You have to help! She's... Oh, Jaxon! Sylvia interrupted, her voice sickeningly sweet. Did you really think I was on your side? She walked calmly to stand beside Alara, an icy smile on her delicate features. No, Jaxon whispered, shaking his head in disbelief. It can't be. Did you think I believed your little stories about the pills? Sylvia continued. That I would betray my duty, everything I stand for, on the word of a delusional traitor? Each word was a dagger to Jackson's heart. Not Sylvia, too. I've been working with Alara since the beginning, she purred, feeding her everything she needed to know, to trap you. Jackson's shock morphed into rage. He lunged at Sylvia with a guttural cry, but Alara's soldiers grabbed him, holding him back. Sylvia's smile only widened at his anguish. Poor Jaxon, she mocked. You never stood a chance. Jaxon went limp in defeat. Everyone he had trusted was against him. The mission was lost. Jackson's mind reeled as the full weight of Sylvia's betrayal sunk in. Their mission to expose the truth about the pills and free humanity from their control had been doomed from the start. Sylvia, his most trusted friend, had played him for a fool. She had likely been feeding Alara information all along. allowing the scientist to stay one step ahead. Jaxon searched Sylvia's icy blue eyes for any glimmer of the person he thought he knew, but found only cruel satisfaction. Her allegiance was clearly with Alara and the authorities behind the pills. "Why, Sylvia," Jaxon croaked, his voice ragged. "I thought we were friends, that you cared about doing what's right." Sylvia let out a short, derisive laugh. "You're more naive than I realized. There is no right, only power. Alara offered me a seat at her table, an opportunity to shape the future." She glanced approvingly at Alara. "You chose the losing side, Jaxon, and now you'll pay the price." Jackson's shoulders slumped in defeat. With Sylvia against him, all hope of exposing the truth died. She had been their ace in the hole, their last chance at infiltrating the Institute. Now Jaxon was utterly alone, his quest in tatters. Alara's smirk told him everything he needed to know. Checkmate. The sharp report of gunfire shattered the silence. Jaxon flinched as the door exploded inward, ripped off its hinges by a burst of automatic rifle fire. Captain Rhodes stalked into the room, flanked by a phalanx of armed soldiers. Rhodes' hard gaze settled on Jaxon with satisfaction, like a hawk spotting its prey. "So, this is where the rat's been hiding," he growled. "Thought you could run off into the woods and stir up trouble without consequences?" He gestured with his rifle. "On your knees, traitor." Jaxon hesitated, then sank down in defeat. After all this, he would die on his knees before a man like Rhodes, a puppet of the very regime he had fought against. Rhodes stepped closer, the barrel of his gun inches from Jackson's forehead. Jaxon stared defiantly up at the captain, refusing to cower. If this was to be his end, he would face it with courage. "For the good of the people, your treachery ends here," Rhodes said. His finger tightened on the trigger. Jaxon closed his eyes. He thought of Lila and their dreams of a better world. At least he would see her again soon. The gunshot echoed through the room. Darkness took him. The forest was eerily quiet as the platoon of soldiers crept through the dense foliage. Their boots crunched on fallen leaves, their rifles were at the ready, and their eyes were on the lookout for any sign of movement. Captain Bracken signaled for them to stop, raising a gloved hand. A twig snapped in the distance. Bracken turned, gesturing with 2 fingers in the direction of the sound. The soldiers scattered, weapons at the ready. Something flashed between the trees. One of the men fired, and the crack of his rifle broke the silence. A scream, and then silence again. They rallied to the spot, finding a young woman lying on the ground with blood flowing from her chest. One of the savages. Bracken poked her inert body with his boot. "Search her belongings. These vermin always travel in groups," he ordered. As they searched her bag, Bracken cleaned the blood from his knife. "Another day of hunting savages. The people at home will sleep soundly tonight, not knowing the cost. Never remembering the sacrifices of people like Jaxon, who gave up everything to protect them. The government's propaganda machine was as effective as ever. The masses obediently took their pills, their minds eclipsed by chemical bliss. Not a whisper of resistance remained. Jaxon was forgotten, his rebellious attitude reduced to another nameless casualty in the war against the savages." Captain Bracken stared impassively at the girl's body, while his men disposed of him. The forest was silent again. Bracken returns to the city, where life goes on as normal. From the loudspeakers come familiar slogans. "Trust the government. We take care of you. Take your pills. Stay obedient." Citizens walk through the streets with glazed eyes. They pass a monument erected after the uprising many years ago, a granite pillar with hundreds of numbers engraved on it, devoid of names. There is no mention of Jaxon, no mention of the man who sacrificed everything for the truth. Inside the Hall of Progress, Director Hale speaks to a group of students. "Our founders created this great nation," he declares. "Trust in their vision. Report any unusual behavior. Be alert to resistance." The students obediently nod their heads, listening to his words. They are the next generation of obedient citizens, designed by pills and propaganda. Nothing has changed.